If you played in the Xbox 360 era, you lived through one of the most unique eras of gaming that has ever existed. An era before live service games, streamers, the popular desire to be a content creator, and the over-commercialization of video games. It was a pocket of gaming that existed in the most pure state that it will likely never be matched again. We lived just on the cusp of the internet age. Coming home to put your backpack down, grab a snack, and wielding a bunch of green cases until you found the one. Pressing the power button and praying for green lights as you flip through the case to read it for the 90th time, thumbing through the artwork and studying the controls as you wait for the game to boot up. This golden era was encapsulated by the very light presence felt of the internet. Prima guides were still thriving, discs were rubbed with alcohol, basic cable was just one click away. Yet the new sensation of wearing a headset to communicate with your friends was an exciting nuance. Loading screens weren't a cue to look at your phone, and the in-game trophies and achievements you won were much more important to you than your Facebook page. Nobody knew it was happening, but the innocence of learning that new technology would leave an imprint on us for the rest of our lives. In this stretch from 2001 to 2010, there were massive video game awakenings for many franchises that we still know today, some of which had 5 to 6 games. In 2024, maybe some would argue that some of these franchises have too many titles. However, there's one trilogy that stands out to me like no other did. Not only was this game revolutionary, exciting, and deep with meaning that made me think about my decisions very carefully, but it has a development story like no other. Today we're going to look at one of the best RPGs ever made for the Xbox, the history and the very beginnings of how Fable was made. The beginnings of Fable stem from two brothers. Dean and Simon Carter were set on making a game called Wish World. The two brothers were very enthusiastic about their project, and their pitch for their game was imagine a 3D Zelda where the world is consistently changing around you. By today's standards, that doesn't sound like too much of nuance. In fact, it might even sound common. However, in the early 2000s, this was extremely unique. Unfortunately, it was something so unique that not many investors were looking for, as many racing games, sports games, and some RPGs with beautiful protagonist women were most popular. Fortunately, Peter Molyneux and Lionhead Studios saw potential. This eventually led to a studio satellite program for Lionhead Studios that will put this project under their umbrella. This gave them a more creative space to focus on their ideas rather than doing administrative work trying to keep the wheels underneath of the project. However, even with this freedom and sturdy wheels, the game would go nowhere without a publisher driving the product. And unfortunately, despite the help from Lionhead and Peter, there was no interest from any publishers. Wishworld was becoming stagnant. Allegedly, one night, Peter and the two brothers were having a drunk conversation, and Peter had suggested maybe to focus on one wizard, a Merlin. Maybe create your own Merlin. Allow players to craft their own singular adventure rather than pushing in and out of various worlds. This intoxicated bar conversation led the two brothers into a second wind. They expanded on this bar conversation to reset their course. They would continue to innovate with Wishworld and push many more boundaries. Looking back on Project Ego, Dean and Simon Carter stated, "We wanted to create a role-playing game like no other. The world would be breathtakingly beautiful and filled with waterfalls, mountains, and dense forests populated with compelling and convincing characters. With real personality, people who actually reacted to what you did. We wanted to give player the control of the hero that would adapt the way that they would, who would age and become scarred in battle, who would get tattoos and wear dreadlocks and wear a dress if the player was so inclined. We wanted to give every person who played our game a unique experience to have their own stories to tell and called it a thingy. Rather than firing up a game with a pre-slated future of your character's story arc, you're in control. And the story does not decide how you're received walking around. Every interaction with an NPC prompted with a decision and how you handle it will ultimately affect the behaviors of the people and the environment around you. This turns the task of decision-making in video games from mundane clicks to well-thought-out decisions. And that's exactly what RPGs needed in this time, as in this era of RPGs, it seemed as if everything was already thought out for you. While there weren't many RPG players that were asking for this specific experience, the idea itself is highly immersive and groundbreaking. Surely this new journey with a character that you shape and the world around it would seem to magnetize investors and publishers, right?
Your health is low. Do you have any potions or food?
But unfortunately, again, that was not the case, as Project Ego would still receive the same response from all publishers that rejected Wishworld. As weeks go on, the epiphany that they had in a small bar now just seems more of a drunk conversation that led to sticky notes on monitors. The small team working out of a house to get this game floating is now strongly discouraged. That was until they received an inquiry from a small publisher, as they hadn't reached out to this company, but this company had actually reached out to them. This was a small company known at the time as Microsoft. They now have investors, a publisher, and interviews to make to fill an office that was 30 miles outside of London. This was the first massive push into a professional studio full of employees and delegating responsibility, like AI and character design, story design, world design, and aesthetic. Now that the new game is focused on one protagonist, they wanted to assure the story was up to par with the new vision. Fable was actually originally slated to be a revenge story, something as a more typical response that a game developer would have for a child that lost his whole village. However, instead of making the story about the character's reaction, they needed to assure it was about the user's reaction. Do you grow bitter and want the world to burn? You can do that. Do you want to become a hero and assure that history never repeats itself again? Well, you could do that too. Side quests with adventuring the original story was also encouraged, with plenty to do inside of the open world. And of course, the world design was very important. The environment was actually inspired by Brothers Grimm. Fairy tales with impenetrable, sometimes beautiful, lush, and sometimes dark and petrifying forests. Giant mountains in the background would create the illusion that there's no limit to exploration. They wanted to make something non-fiction, however, something relatable. And also shake hands with franchises like Mighty Python with undertones of humor so the game wasn't taken a little over seriously. Up to this point, RPGs took themselves very seriously. I suppose they were just worried about breaking immersion or not being well received if they added any type of humor. However, fighting a boss is one thing, but fighting a boss and ripping a fart in front of a bunch of impressed villagers that you just saved was the true Fable experience. There was chicken kicking, dancing, STDs, villagers booing you, and even some love triangles. However, John McCormick's vision was a little bit different, as he was the lead designer of all creatures that populated Albion, many of them looking mythical, mysterious, and earthy. The world was riddled with mythical creatures varying from a gigantic wasp all the way to the notorious Balverine, which the name Balverine was thought to be Gaelic for night creeper. However, it was later discovered that it actually wasn't. But they still kept the name because honestly it's just a cool name, even though it wasn't directly translated correctly like they intended. But what is the existential threat of having goblins and earth-shattering orgs without having villagers to protect? And the people inhabiting the land of Albion were very advanced for their time, as they had AI applications that no game had ever seen before the Xbox launched. These systems were broken down into different components. First, you had the global AI. This AI was responsible for how your reputation precedes you going from city to city, aka being a famous hero that's beloved by all the townspeople, or being famously hated. Inside of this particular global AI, they had found some hidden gems while playtesting. For example, the population could really affect the economy of the town. If you went in and you wiped the entire town clean, the housing market suddenly became a buyer's market. Which leads me to the town AI. This AI was more dialed down to the individuals of the town. If you come back, they had remembered the impression that you made from doing a quest or even making a gesture around them. Each NPC inside the town now has a memory directly correlating all of the decisions that you made around them. And AI number 3 is the character AI that allowed to see the growth of the characters over time. For the most part, the first Fable actually time shifted more than it morphed your character real time. However, the decisions that you made for your character did affect the way that your character looked. You can be an athletic fighting machine if you stuck to a diet of just potions and apples, or you could be a fat pie-eating slob. And ultimately, a good character or a bad character, which resulted in either horns, or you would have a glow about you with a halo eventually. Every decision you made for your character was ported into this AI that inevitably changed your character. And while this was an amazing feature, it actually wasn't the first of its kind. It wasn't even the first of its kind to come from this studio. Lionhead Studios themselves made a game that had this feature in black and white, and many were worried that Blue Box Studio, just a branch of Lionhead, was going to cannibalize their beloved game Black and White. However, the enthusiasm for the project superseded any suspicion of that actually happening, and thank God, because this was one of the better features of the game. Which AI 4 goes to the enemy AI, which is actually something that's not quite groundbreaking. The enemy AI is opposed to anything that you've ever heard anything Souls-like to be. It is made purely to give you an advantage and make sure that you have a good experience in Albion. AI purposely telegraphed any opponent's move to give you all advantages. It even made it so you really only had one-on-one fights even though you were fighting a crowd. This combination of AI was what made Fable's identity. And the AI was perfectly timed, as the competition at the time was PlayStation 1, who only had external memory cards for RPGs to save progress. However, the Xbox had a huge leg up in the competition with a hard disk. And this hard disk really aided in Fable's development, as the character development was more randomized and unpredictable than most standard RPGs at the time. So without Xbox's technology, data saving and randomizing would have been a very hard pair with the game's features. And as Microsoft became aware that the project scope was actually highlighting a lot of the features that PlayStation couldn't offer in the new Xbox, well, the pressure became intense. Fable was originally slated to become a Dreamcast game, and lightly told Sega and Microsoft had a fallout with that deal. Microsoft essentially said, if you're not going to work with us, we're going to use our gigantic bank to push out all of the competition. Sounds very similar to the current business plan they have right now with Game Pass. But this capitalistic business venture made Fable the forefront of the roadmap for Xbox publicity, as it could internally do something without inconveniencing the player to go out and buy external storage. The interest in the game's revolutionary features eventually tripled the staff. The team at one point only had 16 employees working inside of their office outside of London, but now Lionhead, Microsoft, Blue Box, and even contracted employees were populating the studio. And with this dev power came a lot of productivity. There were over 5,000 animations for fighting, a combat multiplier was introduced, multi-targeting systems were introduced, and the smoothness of the overall fighting was upgraded a ton. All of this fast-paced effort was targeted at making an E3 debut trailer. In the time of the development process and the E3 showcase, there was a lot of marketing to be done. Peter Molyneux was at the foreface of marketing this game, and some said that he may have been overly enthusiastic, as he made a lot of giant promises that actually weren't kept, and he had to then apologize in a forum sometime after the game was launched. This created a lot of tension in the studio. Not only were there a bunch of strangers and new faces in there that had different visions for the game, Peter was marketing things that weren't quite fleshed out. However, we all need to consider where this game came from. It was a drunk conversation from somebody that was kind of just like running his mouth. Some people compared Peter Molyneux to a modern Todd Howard. Lots of big promises, sometimes they didn't quite make it to the game. However, even with the somewhat sketchy marketing tactics, the E3 trailer was a complete success, and the game moved forward to their targeted September 14th, 2004 launch date. Not only did they hit the deadline, but it sold 375,000 copies in its first week, and 1.4 million copies by March of 2005. The game was critically acclaimed. Fable was beloved by reviewers, gamers, and other studios even. The revolutionary approach of Fable was something to admire from any perspective except for the studio, who retrospectively looked at the game as far from their best work. Fable received a 9.3 rating from reviewers and several nominations for a handful of awards, and quite a few of these awards were tipping the hat at having the most originality. In 2004, Fable stood in the likes of amazing games like Pokemon Leaf Green and Fire Red, Tony Hawk's Underground 2, Killzone, World of Warcraft, Halo 2, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Monster Hunter, and Tekken 5. But the game that won it all in 2004 was Half-Life 2. Just a year later, Blue Box and Lionhead went off to make Fable Lost Chapters, which was originally intended to just be a PC port of the game. However, it found its way to Xbox as well. It featured all content from the original Fable, as well as new additional content like new monsters, weapons, items, armors, towns, buildings, and expressions. The story had a further expansion with 9 new areas and 16 total additional quests. It also even expanded on some of the characters' details for romance information, including sexuality, number of spouses, the number of weddings, divorces, etc. And this version made its way to Xbox's Platinum hit, meaning the game sold so well in the first 9 months that it went past Microsoft's expectations and went into a lengthy customer benefit period, where customers could buy the best-selling Platinum hit games on Xbox's platform for only $20. Could you imagine that in 2024? They just don't make them like they used to. Thinking back to the original Xbox and the 360 era, I do think of a lot of fun and memorable IPs, but none of them quite offered exactly what the original experience of Fable gave me. Although the studio might completely disagree, I think that Fable was a perfect game for its time. The graphics, the music, the world design, the monster design, the simplicity of leveling up, and the easily approached quest board. Fable is with ease one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had holding an Xbox controller. Which leads to my next question: how would Fable stack up in 2024? I'll be playing through the last chapters and creating a retrospective in 2024 as we ramp up for hopefully the new reboot of Fable coming hopefully soon. I'll be both streaming it to you guys live on this channel, and I'll also be collecting moments and thoughts to gather to put inside of a retrospective, which would be an entirely new video. My goal is to see if Fable holds its value in 2024, so please subscribe and like this video if you're interested, as I will be sprinkling a lot of Fable content into my video library to hopefully ramp up for the reboot that hopefully launches in spring 2025. And if this video gets 100 likes, I'll be diving into Fable 2's history in a very similar format that we just went through. So keep your eyes on this channel for more Fable content, and have a good day.